It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, everybody. It is another Sunday here at the Locked On Podcast Network, and you know what that means. It means Locked On NFL Sunday is live here with you for another weekend recap of the off season. You've got myself, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola, and my good friend, Cody Roark, at Cody Roark NFL. Cody, how are you, man?
I'm good, Ross. You mentioned offseason. There's really never an offseason.
Yeah, isn't that true?
At the Locked On Podcast Network, we have podcasts for your favorite sport, your favorite team, every single day, all year long, folks. That's why we call it your team every day. So, Ross, happy Sunday, my friend.
Happy Sunday, man. Glad to be back here with you. And we have a jam-packed show today, a ton to get through and a ton of information to get to you. So I'm going to real quick just kind of go over what we're going to talk about today. Cody and I are going to start off going on a little bit about the couple of free agency moves that we've seen over the week. The free agency market has really started to stall out a little bit, but we'll talk about the moves that do continue to happen. And then we're going to be joined by 4 guests on today's show. So first, we'll get to talk to our good friend and the newest member of the Locked On NFL channel here, hosting the Locked On Carolina Panthers podcast, be Julian Council. So he's going to come through, join us, talk a bit about the Carolina Panthers, what they've done so far this offseason, and how things are looking in terms of the outlook of the offseason thus far. Then we're going to be joined by Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins, as well as Draft Dudes, the Dolphins, the 49ers, and the Eagles all tied up in a big blockbuster trade on Friday. So we're going to get every angle of that. So we'll start with Kyle. Then Gino Camilleri is going to join us from Locked On Eagles. Then Brian Peacock is going to join us from Locked On 49ers. So it is a jam-packed show today because we want to make sure we get you every angle of that trade from our local experts.
Man, it's going to be fun. I mean, you know, if you would have told me on Friday, I mean, it's just your typical Friday around the National Football League, just blockbuster trades, you know, while they're at a pro day. You know, John Lynch was on the phone at the Zach Wilson pro day. He's just sitting there with a cup of coffee in his hand. He's like, hey, we just orchestrated this trade. Boom. And then bam, it, you know, blows up the internet. And tell you what, the Miami Dolphins, they look really smart. You know, the 49ers, you could tell that maybe they're positioning themselves for a quarterback. But I'm excited to be able to hear from the local experts here on all the angles, as you mentioned, for their team respectively in terms of draft order. And Philadelphia obviously moving back, which is a really odd move. So eager to get Gino's insight on that as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's start off today with our look at some of the big free agency moves that have happened. Remember, any team, any player that we talk about on today's show, we have you covered elsewhere here on the Locked On Podcast Network, because every NFL team, we have a Locked On show covering Monday through Friday. So make sure you go and check them out as well for some more of the local angle, but you're here for the national angle. So let's get started. One of the big moves that we've seen here recently, Lamar Jackson gets his wide receiver, Sammy Watkins going to the Baltimore Ravens. How does this one feel for you?
Well, I tell you what, you know, Lamar Jackson gets his wide receiver, but, you know, is he going to throw him the ball? Is he going to be able to be consistent with that? And it's still for Lamar Jackson. That's something that we've talked about, right? When we watched them in the playoffs, the one thing we were looking at is how come they can't consistently make those throws? Like Mark Andrews is Lamar Jackson's go-to guy. You know, you still have guys like Hollywood Brown, but Mark Andrews was that guy for Lamar Jackson. Lamar has to take the next step in his game to be a more consistent passer. Now, throughout last season, I'd say he improved as a passer, but then down the stretch, we saw those moments where he was inconsistent. So Sammy Watkins, I think, will be a nice little security blanket. Is he going to be a guy that's going to come in and be game-changing? I don't think so. I still think they're going to add a receiver in this year's NFL draft. I mean, I'd be shocked if they didn't. But, yeah, I mean, you know, Sammy Watkins going on from the Kansas City Chiefs now to the Baltimore Ravens. And, look, just another weapon to throw to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that this match is a good boost for Lamar Jackson in terms of his wide receiver core, but I completely agree with you. I don't think they can consider themselves done at this position at all. Another big name actually hits the free agency, hits the open market. We don't often see this happen, but defensive tackle Jarran Reed now on the market. He and the Seattle Seahawks were not able to come to an agreement. One of them wanted a pay cut. The other one wanted a new deal. You can guess which party wanted what. And now Jarran Reed is on the market. And this is a pretty big addition for, what was already a pretty populated interior defensive line free agency group. But now a lot of teams around the NFL still looking to add talent at this position, and one of the best just hits the market.
Well, and I think the benefit for these teams right now too, Ross, is that probably you can orchestrate a 1-year, $5 million deal. I mean, this is what the market is looking like right now. Most of the big market deals happened the week of the legal tampering period. The second wave of free agency occurred last week, where we saw some of these smaller deals come in, maybe a couple of 2-year, multi-year deals, but nothing with big numbers, right? So now we're at that stage 3, that phase 3 of NFL free agency, where these deals coming in are a best bargain for a team, and they give a player an opportunity to maybe audition themselves for a bigger payday next year. So it makes sense. There's some teams out there that do need some help on the defensive line, and Reed would be a great addition to, I think, any team that really needs a guy that can put his hand in the dirt, get after the quarterback, and kind of strong arm a little bit, against offensive tackles. So it'll be exciting to see where they decide to go and, who snags him up. But like I said, this is what we call Dollar Tree deals right here. Right. So, yeah, we'll see. I think the market is going to be shaping out to be really interesting. And I think obviously due to the lower salary cap, Ross, I mean, it kind of put a lot of these players in that position. There's still some really good players that are unsigned, but they're going to have to sign for lesser money than what they were hoping to make.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about it over and over again, right? The appeal of the 1-year deal so that you can get back on the market for next season and hopefully get a bigger paycheck at that point. Speaking of saying, we just talked about how exciting it'll be to see what Jarran Reed does. One of the more interesting teams in the NFL to see what they're going to do here moving forward, particularly at the quarterback position and so on, is going to be the Carolina Panthers. And to help us talk about that, we're going to welcome in our newest member of the Locked On family coming through, host of the Locked On Panthers podcast, bringing in Julian Council. Julian, how are you, my friend? Thanks for joining us, man.
I'm good. Just joining you live from the Johnson City, Tennessee DoubleTree. We'll be stuck here for a couple of days, it looks like, as it's raining. And my day job, NASCAR, they're supposed to be racing on dirt this weekend. Hard to race on dirt when it rains. So got plenty of time to sit here and talk to you guys today.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Julian, first off, just want to say welcome to the Locked On podcast family. Very excited to see what type of angle you're going to bring. I know Carolina Panthers fans will be very excited because, look, I've done some background, and you're the type of person that's not going to sugarcoat things. You're going to, speak it how it is. And I think that fans really appreciate that, especially because you don't get it. Because often at times we hear fans that, they get, kind of smoke blown up their rear end because they're like, hey, bam, this team's doing this. But the first question I want to ask you, kind of as a welcome into the Locked On podcast family, what were your thoughts on the Carolina Panthers last season and kind of leading up into this offseason that you're excited to kind of touch base on in 2021?
I mean, expectations going into the first year of Matt Rule were extremely low. You're losing Cam Newton, you're losing Luke Kuechly, Greg Olsen, pretty much every name that you knew for the past 5, 7, 9 years, and add Ron Rivera there, they were all gone. So it was a little changing of the guard here in Carolina. So I didn't have a lot of expectations. Teddy Bridgewater, the signing, I never loved it at the time, but it made sense to go ahead and bring in an actual professional quarterback opposed to sticking with Will Grier, who clearly, as we saw at the end of the 2019 season when he started that one game in Indianapolis, he was not ready to go, not ready to start a full 16-game season. So I didn't have high expectations. I did think that at times they would be able to be competitive because it is the NFL. This isn't college football. We're getting blown up by 40 points every week. This is a one-possession games week in and week out. So they met my expectations, trying to find a solid core and see what kind of young pieces that they could build around. And heading to this offseason, it's going off of building around guys like Jeremy Chin, Shaq Thompson, and what else they have on offense with Christian McCaffrey coming back healthy, TJ Moore, who's now had back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons with the likes of Teddy Bridgewater, Kyle Allen, and a banged-up Cam Newton thrown to him. Like, they have some pieces to work around on this roster for the next year in this offseason coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a very interesting team to watch. And of course, it's going to take some time before things start to settle in. My question for you is that, as you look at some of the other positions of need that go beyond just the quarterback position, which I think is getting a lot of focus right now, what are some of those other focus? It's getting all the focus right now. Yeah. But our good friend over at WCNC, Nick, talked a little bit about how it's the quarterback and that they're away. How do you feel about that situation? What are some of the other most important positions that this team needs to fortify?
An entire offensive line would help. I'm not trying to put a rookie quarterback behind Cam Irving playing left tackle. Like Cam Irving and Pat Elflein being signed to likely be the left tackle and the left guard is not inspiring. Like, you want to put a rookie quarterback between these two turnstiles who did not make it at any of their previous stops. Like, they need a new left tackle. Greg Little has not worked out. He was not drafted by Matt Rule or the new general manager, Scott Spitzer. So I would imagine he's probably on the outs. Dennis Daly is a guy who was drafted by Marty Herney. Where does he fit in? He played left tackle at South Carolina. He's played a little bit of guard and left tackle at times in his brief stint with the Carolina Panthers, but he's been injured, just like Greg Little. So left guard, left tackle, center is fine for right now with Matt Paradis, but this is his last year of his deal. Right guard, they're bringing back John Miller, but that's not a long-term option. Like, the only thing on the offensive line is Taylor Moton at right tackle, and they still need to sign him to a new deal. Also could use a pass-catching tight end. Dan Arnold kind of helps, but it's only one season he's really done it. Could use a 3 technique at defensive tackle. Could probably use 2 starting cornerbacks. Not sure I'm sold on Dante Jackson past this season. And Justin Burris was fine last year at safety, but now moving Jeremy Chin back there after cutting Trey Boston, you're going to need another starting safety. So there's a lot of holes. And a kicker. The kicker's not very good. So someone other than Joey Sly. And eventually you're going to need a new long snapper because J.J. Jansen's getting up there in years. So quarterback is obviously what people want, but this is not a roster where you plug in a quarterback, whether it's a Trey Lance or even a Deshaun Watson, and, hey, let's go get a Super Bowl. It's like, no, you can't block for him. You don't have a great pass rush, and you can't stop any of the top quarterbacks in your division. It's going to be kind of a problem. So, there's a lot of needs on this roster outside of quarterback.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at the window, I think for Matt Rule and with David Tepper coming in and saying, hey, look, we're trying to rebuild, but they didn't really tear things down. Now, last year we saw them go in the NFL draft with an all-defense approach. And I tell you what, just watching them, those young defensive players, I think will groom and mold themselves into solid contributors and even like stabilizers. I mean, Jeremy Chin is already ahead, I think, in the NFL of where probably most people thought he would be. He's one of those players that just stands out on the tape. For you this year, for the NFL draft, which is coming up here in just a month, where do you think the biggest lean is for them? Where do you think that they're going to go? I mean, we talk about quarterback and, but, are there any other positions they might go with in the NFL draft?
I think offensively, the offensive side of the ball, as you pointed out last year, using all 7 picks on defense, Matt Rule already said heading into the offseason free agency, technically, that he wanted to get younger on the offensive side of the ball. So offensive line is certainly a position I would think, and I just went over literally needing a new offensive lineman at every single position outside of right tackle. So I would see either offensive line or quarterback. I mean, quarterback makes the most sense, trying to identify that guy, but again, it's hard to put him back there. But the good thing is you have Teddy Bridgewater, at least for another season. He has a contract where I don't think any team out there, especially considering where the salary cap is, can take on his deal to be a backup. So he's likely to start this year, whether they draft a quarterback or not. But if it's not going to be quarterback, I think it's got to be offensive line, just considering Matt Rule wanting to get younger on that side of the ball.
Yeah. Julian, before we get you out of here, we usually only do 3 questions, but I have to ask you one thing before we let you get out of here.
Sure.
With this trade that happened yesterday, with you have the Dolphins moving out, then back in, the 49ers moving ahead of the Panthers. Does this affect the Panthers draft at all in terms of seeing these teams move around?
Well, Trevor Lawrence is already going number 1. We knew that. Zach Wilson likely was not going to be a guy they were going to get, just considering the Jets probably don't want to give Sam Darnold that 5th-year option. So he was never really on the table. At 3, you could have thought the Panthers could have traded up to get Justin Fields or Trey Lance. But I don't know how they feel about either one of those guys. I know they were up in Fargo last week for Trey Lance's pro day, so clearly they're interested. I don't think it really affects them. I think that they were always going to be a team that was going to sit back there and stay at 8, knowing that they had a lot of holes to fill, and they can't be giving up on what San Francisco gave 3 first-round picks to go up and get a guy who might end up being their franchise quarterback. Like, he's going to start eventually, whoever they draft. But, I mean, we're talking about giving 3 first-round picks to Deshaun Watson. So I don't think the Carolina Panthers need to be in the business of trying to get a kid, if it was Trey Lance, who's played 17 games against FCS competition. And, I mean, it's like Alabama playing against high schoolers, basically. That's what it's been with North Dakota State. I know that they lost this year without him, but it's not the same deal as playing with the big boys week in and week out, whether you're in the Big Ten or the SEC. So I don't think it affects them really that much. I still feel like if they can have a chance to get a quarterback, whether it's Fields or Lance staying at 8, and that they're likely, if there's not a quarterback, going to go best player available, because there's certainly, as I pointed out, plenty of holes on this roster that need to be filled before this team even enters the Super Bowl window.
Yeah, absolutely. Julian, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We appreciate you being here. Y'all make sure you follow Julian on Twitter at Julian Council. Twitter handle is below. You can find him also on the Locked On Panthers podcast. Brand new episodes upcoming. We're so grateful to have Julian here. And check out his other show as well, talking all Charlotte sports, the 704, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts as well. Julian, appreciate you coming through, buddy.
All right, thanks, guys.
Bam. Yeah, I like Julie. Julie's got some good energy to him, man. I tell you what, I think Panthers fans are gonna be really excited listening to him talk every single day because he's got that voice, he's got that energy. It's gonna keep you glued in all 30 minutes of your ride to work, or whether you're making breakfast or dinner, depending on when you listen. So obviously, welcome Julian into the Locked On Podcast family. Now, here's something, Ross, too. Part of me is thinking, why not? I mean, why not Mac Jones? I mean, there's a lot of talk there that, Matt Rule, they had an opportunity to work with him at the Senior Bowl. Right. Mac Jones, ever since that picture came out of him smoking the cigar and he's got the dad bod, everybody saying, hey, he's not a first-round quarterback. But look, there was a story that came out that when he was a practice squad quarterback, he was tearing up Nick Saban's #1 defense, and he told him to cut it out. And he says, tell your defense to stop it. So, hey, look, you like guys like that. So San Francisco making that move, man. Do you think I feel like there's so much smoke and mirrors because there's talk about Justin Fields, there's talk about Mac Jones even at 3,
right?
And Trey Lance. So it's kind of like, who are the 3 quarterbacks that they're really trying to decipher from?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, the big question mark about this quarterback group was who is the legitimate quarterback 2 between Justin Fields and Zach Wilson. Now it seems that the conversation has turned to who is quarterback 3 because we'll have to see exactly where they go here. But in order for the San Francisco 49ers to even get themselves in that situation where they have to make that decision, they needed a little bit of help, and that help came from the Miami Dolphins, who did something I thought was really, really smart throughout all of this trade talk here over the last day since Friday. So to help us sort of break all of it down and talk more in depth about it and get the Miami Dolphins perspective, we're going to welcome in our good friend Kyle Krabs. Kyle is the host of the Locked On Dolphins podcast, which you can check every Monday through Friday. And you can also catch him every Monday through Friday along with Joe Marino over at the Draft Dudes podcast as well. You can follow him on Twitter at Grinding the Tape. Kyle, appreciate you coming through, buddy.
Good morning, guys. How we doing?
Doing all right, man. Thanks for being here.
We're doing good, Kyle. Look, Kyle, I don't know, man. Friday, I just feel like the Dolphins, they're in flex mode right now. We talked about the 49ers trying to load up a couple of years ago. Now the Dolphins are in a great position to really build this team, not only just this year, but even going into next year and the year afterward. What are your thoughts on the big trade on Friday?
Well, the running joke on Friday afternoon was the Dolphins need a new statue out front of Hard Rock Stadium for Laramie Tunsil, and the plaque underneath was just going to be all the draft picks that they eventually turned that trade into. Wow. When they made that trade, they called for one of the first-round picks up, but the trade for Laramie Tunsil eventually netted 4 first-round picks for an offensive tackle as the dominoes have fallen here. So They've told us, they've tried to tell us, this regime, we're going to build through the draft. We're going to try and build a sustainable winner. And then they go out and they spent like crazy last year in free agency. And we were like, oh, well, maybe it's the same old Dolphins. But this ability to parlay this asset into future first round picks and get more draft capital to work with and more flexibility. And they've been a little bit more fiscally responsible this year in free agency. It's definitely the reinforcement that you needed in year 3, in which year 1 of the regime told you one thing, year 2 told you something different. Well, now that's like, okay, this is really who this franchise wants to be.
Mm-hmm. I think it's great. I mean, I love so let's talk a little bit about it, kind of step through it. So they're sitting at pick 3. They trade back out of the top 10 with San Francisco, give them that selection. And then they move back up to pick 6 with Philadelphia. What's the mentality there in terms, is that just maximizing selections and getting where they actually want to be?
I think there's a couple different ways that you could look at it. Mm-hmm. When it first happened, it was like, oh, okay, they got a guy that they really, really believe in. They believe that guy is going to be there at 6. And it's smart, right? Because you play the quarterback market. You look at Cincinnati and Atlanta. If one of them moves out, you're talking 4 quarterbacks. But even if you see Kyle Pitts and Penei Sewell or Jamar Chase go, and those 2 picks in between where Miami moved out, if they want one of the Alabama wide receivers, they're presuming those guys will both be there for them. And I think that's really kind of the advantageous position that they've put themselves in for this year. Now they need to knock 6 out of the park, because if you gave up a first in 2022 to move back up 6 spots for a guy who's only okay, then you'll probably have some buyer's remorse when it's all said and done. But you almost get to still dictate the quarterback market to a certain degree, because the teams that are interested, Carolina at 8, you have the Denver Broncos potentially at 9. Cody, I know that's your market, so I'll let you tell me. But then the New England Patriots all the way back at 15, and everybody would presume the Patriots loading up. This felt like maybe a year in which they could go all in. Well, unless New England from 15 wants to give up the moon to go up to 4 or 5, Miami's almost got like another pinch point here where they can almost kind of dictate some of the terms. And that's a nice side effect of what's going on here. But I really think this is just, they got a short list of guys, and they're playing the numbers game here, betting that more than one of them is going to be on the board for them at 6.
Yeah.
I think it's you, Ross. But the one thing I wanted to kind of throw to you too, because I got killed by Miami Dolphins fans for this. I put out there probably 3 months ago, I said, hey, look, I think that Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle, any of these 2 wide receivers are probably the serious target considerations. And according to reports that are out there, that seems to be kind of a common consensus. Now, Kyle, for you, is this more of a move that's going to help make Tua feel more comfortable, actually getting a full offseason ingrained with him, or do they really believe these guys are just, regardless who's the quarterback, is going to add that necessary value?
Well, I think that'll be a telling pick, because if Jamar Chase is on the board and they do choose Jamar Chase, I do think the Alabama guys, between the chemistry that they have and their style of play, would be better fit strictly for Tua Tagovailoa. I would expect the Dolphins, because they have all this flexibility and draft assets moving forward, and they're anticipating a big leap with Tua in year 2, I would expect them to just stay true to their board. I don't know if they're necessarily going to skew it to what Tua does and doesn't do well. But none of the 4 would surprise me. And that's kind of the kudos to the Dolphins. And you remember the build up to last year's draft. Maybe it was Tua, maybe it was Justin Herbert, maybe it was an offensive tackle at 5 and Jordan Love later in the draft. Like, they like playing these games, and you can sit here and you can make a really strong case for either one. But I think it will be really telling to give them a mentality on how they're evaluating Tua Tagovailoa if they choose to say, yep, we're going to go get a guy that you've worked with in the past that we know you're going to click with, or if they're strictly going to say, we're taking the best guy available.
I love it. Look, I think that, when you see these big moves and everything, I just want to remind everybody, Kyle, not only at Locked On Dolphins every Monday through Friday, but you could also find him at Draft Dudes as well with Joe Marino every Monday through Friday. And Kyle did something I thought was absolutely incredible. The moment that this draft, that this trade sort of happened, if you head over to the Draft Network, there's immediately a mock draft from Kyle with the new draft order. Can you walk us through a bit of like the frenzy after that happens? Because you guys are always so on top of it, so responsive and right there in the moment. What was that moment like for you?
Well, I was getting ready to put my daughter down for a nap, and the phone just starts blowing up. And by the time I really processed what happened on the first one, they made the second move. So it kind of turned into like this 3-hour whirlwind of like, my mind's trying to process everything that's happening. And then you start thinking about the domino effects from the NFL draft perspective. And it's like, well, San Francisco, where are they going to go? The relationships that they had in the past with Justin Fields, with the Shanahans, or Trey Lance, or Mac Jones, like you guys just got done talking about before I hopped on. And then you start really fleshing out like the dynamics of the top 10 here. And it was fun to just get through a mock draft scenario in which, okay, we know this is what the top 3 are going to look like, regardless of which quarterback it is, and kind of drawing it out and really seeing the narratives that change. And I think it's going to be really fun. This is going to inject a little bit of enthusiasm. We've kind of had the same status quo here at the top of the draft order for a little bit. So to know this ahead of time, a month out, I think is going to give us a good opportunity to parse through some new scenarios for the mocks.
Absolutely. And it's going to be a blast. We are, as Kyle just mentioned, a month away from the NFL draft. Well, a month and a day, but hey, look, a month is what I'm going to call it because I'm ready. Exactly. I'm ready for this to get here. So it's going to be a ton of fun, and all the great work over at Draft Network, Locked On Dolphins, and Draft Dudes. Kyle, we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at @GrindingTheTape. Thanks for coming through, bud.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Bam. Ross, looking at this Dolphins team, I tell you what, I really like what Brian Flores has done. There you have the whole Kyle Van Noy where he's like, no comment, but I think that has something to do with more of his personality. Brian Flores, from what I gather from Dolphins players and Dolphins media and Dolphins fans, is that he is doing a really good job trying to change the previous culture around. And I think right now he's got a real opportunity. But, we talk about Jalen Waddle. We talk about Devonta Smith potentially going to them at pick number 6. They also have the 18th pick in this year's draft. Do you think that they maybe might reach out and maybe gamble on a local Florida guy and a Kyle Pitts? Because look, I'm telling you, he's a playmaker. He's not just a tight end. He's everything. He can line up at X. He can play Z. He can play inline at Y, and he's fast. And there was a tweet going out that he has heavy feet. Come on, man.
That was one of my favorites. That was one of my favorite videos to hit during draft season so far is look how heavy his feet are. And then he's making all of these plays, and you're just kind of going, okay, but yeah, no, look, you asked me, should blank be interested in Kyle Pitts? And the answer is yes. I don't care what team it is. Every team except for maybe Jacksonville. Well, honestly, no, Jacksonville should be interested too because they could roll around a little bit later and maybe potentially move up with their later first round pick. So every team should be interested in what Kyle Pitts can bring. I am 100% on the Kyle Pitts train, and I'm ready to see that up in the NFL for sure.
Oh, I'm excited because now we get, if you ever watched The Game on BET, one of my favorite shows of all time, there's Jason Pitts. Now you got Kyle Pitts. So the trademarks and everything else that you can come up with, they kind of write themselves there. So, I think Miami's in a really good position. And when you look at the division, it has New England really trying to go all in this year, it appears.
Right.
And then you have the Buffalo Bills, who everybody's coming back. Everybody took restructured deals to come back. You can make the argument. Who knows where the Jets are going to be, but maybe under new leadership with Robert Saleh there, that might be one of the sleeper divisions right now that actually could end up being one of the most competitive. So I'm really excited to see kind of how things are going to play out with them.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that division, and I'm also very excited with their NFC counterpart, the NFC East, because this division has continued to grow in intrigue all throughout the NFL's offseason. As you mentioned before, Locked On, we don't have an offseason. The NFL has an offseason, and it's been a busy one for these NFC East teams. And to help us talk about one of them that was involved in the wild Blockbuster trade on Friday, we're going to get the Eagles' perspective from our good friend Gino Camilleri. Buddy, how are you, man? Appreciate you coming through for us today.
Fellas, happy to be here. And I heard you guys making that joke about the Kyle Pitts heavy feet tweet. That was from Eagles Twitter, so I will apologize for that. That wasn't on my behalf, but it was one of us, so I will take the fault for that. But no, it's a great day to be here. I think this franchise is moving in a good direction after that trade the other day.
Love it, man.
Gino, let's kind of get your thoughts on it, right? Because originally the Eagles, they sat at number 6. They moved back to 12. Kind of, what is your thought process on the decision for them to move back? I mean, usually we see this happening during the draft, right? We don't necessarily see a trade back to the extent of what we saw, obviously, with a couple of moves with San Francisco and Miami that we saw with the Eagles on Friday.
Yeah, I think if you look at what Miami has done, it's kind of unprecedented in terms of how many draft selections they actually had. So once that deal went down, it now opened Howie Roseman's eyes to say, okay, where is this market inefficiency? Let's look at Miami, who has all of these draft picks, and see if we can help our team out right now. Because when you look at it, they need help now and they need help in the future. They're not just one player away like they were in 2018 and 2019. They're 6, 7, 8 players away from being in Super Bowl territory once again. So to look at it and potentially have 3 first-round picks in 2022, plus having 4 day 1 and day 2 picks this year, this team is bulking up for a long-term run. They're not just looking at right now. They're doing the proactive thing for once. It's been a long time since they've been proactive, and I believe this is the first time that they're actually looking past just 2021. And they're going to have a ton of good talent coming out of this roster. And if Howie can't get it done with these picks, I think his leash is as short as ever. So you might see him on the way out if he can't get it done. And frankly, it's on him now. He's doing this to himself. He moved out of the position at 6 to move back to 12. And we're talking about Kyle Pitts. I think that takes you out of that territory. Now you look to get quantity over quality. And I believe that in the NFL, and every team should believe it, you need at-bats. You need swings of the bat. You need draft picks, especially Howie Roseman, who hasn't been too great in day 1 and day 2.
Some great points there, Gino. And I have to ask, too, I mean, they move out of the position that they were in. They go back 6 spots. This seems to signify, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems to signify that they're comfortable with Jalen Hurts moving forward. We had certainly heard that would possibly be the case, but this seems to sort of be the franchise kind of echoing that as well. Am I wrong in assuming that? And if I'm not, how do you feel about that, the idea of moving forward with Jalen Hurts at quarterback?
So I believe that this ultimately puts you in a win-win scenario because you can't judge Jalen Hurts off of 4 games. Even though everybody has what they thought he was coming out of college, I still have my draft take on him, and I still believe that there were better quarterbacks this year and next year than possibly Jalen Hurts. But at the same time, you now open up the ability to go out and if you want to draft a weapon for him at 12 or even 2 of the picks on day 2, you can do that. And it sets you up for success for Jalen Hurts having help, but it also sets you up for next year. If Jalen comes out there and he has, let's say, 59% completion percentage, throws 14 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, halfway through the season, things aren't looking great. You've already set yourself up to help the next guy in what you're doing currently. Because in 2022, even if you have 3 picks, 2 of them can be for non-quarterbacks, or, which a lot of people haven't mentioned, you move into the Stephon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins territory, where if Jalen does work out and next year you're looking to compete, you go out and get a guy like that who's coming off of their first contract. The team doesn't want to pay them, but you have 3 first-round picks where you're able to part with one of them to get a top-tier player into your franchise. So I think right now the goal is to evaluate Jalen as much as possible this season, see what you really have in him. But at the end of the day, you draft your guy in the first round. You don't take your guy at 53rd overall. So that's the kind of fine-edged sword we have to walk here.
Well, the question I want to kind of throw to you now, we see in the NFC East, it was a tough division. I mean, when we look at win-loss record, it didn't really indicate that. But with Dak Prescott now signing his major contract, they have a lot of those wide receiving weapons coming about. How much of an emphasis do you feel like the Eagles need to really place on defense this year? They lost some guys in free agency. What are your thoughts right now on the Eagles defense heading into the NFL draft and potentially heading into the season?
Great point. You should always draft to beat your division. And I fully believe now more than ever, you have to go defense, especially at the cornerback or defensive back position. I'm a big safety guy, so I wouldn't mind them grabbing a safety because they are light there as well. But when you look around, Washington, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, the Giants, they have Slayton and they have Kenny Golladay now.
Right.
Now you have Dallas with their 3-headed dragon, and you're sitting here past Darius Slay with nobody that has much experience, and there's a lot of guys that are just guys on this roster. So sitting at 12, I think it opens up the ability to not have to force an offensive selection in the top 5 or 6 like you were prior. Now you're sitting there. If a guy like J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain is there, or if you're a Kwity Paye lover, you have that ability to go out and get one of those guys. And I think J.C. Horn and what he did in his pro day only solidified that he should be a first-round pick. He played SEC competition. He played a lot of these guys that you're going to go up against in those type of roles where he's the guy matching up against their guy. He was in the slot. He was outside. He moved around. He was covering Kyle Pitts for a little bit when they played Florida. So he's a guy that can do it all. And you need that because in 2 years, Darius Slay isn't going to be here. And then what do you have? And even at the safety position, Rodney McLeod is gone after this year. You need to make things happen on the defensive backfield, or your team is going to turn into a Big 12 defense where you're allowing 30 to 40 points a game. Because right now, you field Dallas's offense against our defense, it is not going to look good. And I don't think it's going to look good this year. But in 2 years, when you start to focus on developing that defense and adding more bodies there, which I wouldn't be surprised if 3 out of the first 4 selections the Eagles made were on defense. But if you get one at 12, you're helping yourself out a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. Gino, great stuff, man. We appreciate you taking the time to come through. You can catch Gino and his great co-host, Louis DiBiase, every Monday through Friday over at the Locked On Eagles podcast. You can follow Gino as well on Twitter at GC24_football. Gino, we appreciate you coming through, bud.
Hey, fellas. Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too, man. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Gino, man. Happy Sunday. The Eagles, he made a really interesting point. You look at Darius Slay, they lose some safety guys. I could really see them taking cornerback with the 12th pick because I think with how some of these trades are shaping out a little bit and how the board is kind of evolving, part of me feels like they're going to be in a prime position. I think Patrick Surtain will still be available. I think Caleb Farley will still be available due to his, he just had surgery, some of the injury concerns.
Right.
So teams are still really impressed. He interviewed well at Virginia, at Virginia Tech's pro day. Didn't do anything, obviously, but he was there. He interviewed with teams, and teams liked him. But then again, I don't think that a lot of teams are going to risk their first round pick, and not even maybe in the top 20. I think he may drop maybe towards the end of round 1. So it'll be interesting to see. But Louis makes a lot of great points. I mean, not Louis, Gino makes a lot of great points as to the fact that you have to find a way to to stop some of these wide receiving threats that the NFC East has, which, look, it's a tough task as is with Amari Cooper, and then you add in CeeDee Lamb, and now you have Michael Gallup there. And then the Washington football team probably has just as scary of a wide receiving core now, too.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing. Like, I think it's so interesting watching the NFC East right now. That's why I mentioned that they're becoming one of the more intriguing divisions coming off of last year. I mean, they were intriguing last year, but kind of for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
This year, maybe that competition really steps up. And I like what Gino said about the quarterback position. This is something that we also talk about when we talk about the Giants, who are also in the same division as them. If they continue to load up as they have, right, redeveloping and sort of redefining who's available to them at the skill positions around Daniel Jones, they have set themselves up in a situation to where they evaluate Daniel Jones in 2021. If he's better with the weapons that are around him, then you're good. You continue to move forward. But then if he's not, you're Gucci there too, because then you have all of these fantastic weapons around him that you can end up importing to the next quarterback that comes in his place. You might see the Philadelphia Eagles take the same approach with Jalen Hurts, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm also a big believer in you don't give up on a young quarterback after 4 games. Look, I think the dilemma, and Ross, you watched the game where Jalen Hurts played against the Saints, the team that you cover. He lit it up and he was exciting to watch. Then he has a couple games where he comes back down to earth a little bit. That's the normal process of what a young quarterback is going to go through. But right now we see this issue around the NFL, and fan bases, they buy into it heavy because we've seen quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes rise at a very accelerated, very rare pace. And everybody's comparing, our young quarterback needs to play like Patrick Mahomes did. It is the NFL's biggest issue right now. And look, I think Jalen Hurts can be a very solid guy. We've seen him at the collegiate level step in. He's always been that guy that even if he had to come in for a half because, Tua was hurt. And then when Tua came in, he gracefully handed it back over to him with no sour feelings, became the guy at Oklahoma. I think that we're in a position right now with Jalen Hurts that if you give up on him way too early, it's a fireable offense, in my opinion. I think it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Like give the guy a shot, and it looks like they have prepped themselves to be able to do so as they have now moved back to 12, which still puts them in position there to either try to shore up the defense or get him a weapon, as Gino mentioned. But then they still have a load of picks coming up throughout these next couple of years to continue to build as well. And maybe, I don't know if we want to call him the biggest benefactor, but certainly the biggest mover. We'll learn about benefactor. We'll hear it here in just a moment. He'll let us know. But in terms of the biggest mover when it comes to the big blockbuster trade on Friday, the San Francisco 49ers moving all the way up to pick number 3 in place of the Miami Dolphins. And to give us more insight on that move, we're going to welcome in from Locked on 49ers, as well as from the Peacock and Williamson Show, one of our flagship shows here at the Locked on Podcast Network. Our guy, Brian Peacock, you can follow on Twitter at BD Peacock. Brian, thanks for joining us, bud.
What's happening, fellas? Happy to be here with you on this. Actually, hold on. I just made my coffee.
Yeah, here. We'll all take a quick sip together, catch up because it's been a wild time.
In ready for this now. Let's go. Okay. Yeah. Woo. What?
Gotta love the West Coast, man.
Yeah.
West Coast
Best Coast.
Fantastic. I'm looking outside right now. Beautiful weather. I might even have to go golf or something today because it's just one of those West Coast days right now.
You should do it. My birthday's coming up this week. Just go on behalf of me. Go golfing. You've earned it. But Brian, obviously, thank you so much for joining us, my friend. Look, Jimmy's our guy this year, but we all know the NFL smokescreen. Cliff Kingsbury said the same thing about Josh Rosen. All right, we know the big trade, right? They move all the way up to number 3 now. In your opinion, does this move signify quarterback? Because that's what the vibe looks like right now. And even though the talk is that Jimmy G is our guy, part of me's thinking he ain't the guy.
Well, he's obviously not the guy. They've made the decision to move on there. Eventually, when that move happens in the quarterback they draft at 3, and yes, it's absolutely 100% going to be a quarterback at 3, then we'll find out when that is. When that move is, Garoppolo has value to the team now. He also has value to not being on the team. So you want to have a smooth transition to the new quarterback. Maybe the rookie comes in, he's not quite ready. Kyle Shanahan's offense is one of those that famously takes a little while. And even a veteran like Matt Ryan, it took him to his 2nd year to hit that level of comfortability in Kyle Shanahan's offense. So having a stopgap quarterback that already knows the system, that would help the rookie. That would help the 49ers, who believe they're in win now mode still currently in 2021. So I get wanting to keep Jimmy Garoppolo, and you want to make Jimmy Garoppolo feel good about sticking around. You also want to keep his value as high as It can be in case a team comes calling with an offer that you have to take. So he has value to the 49ers currently. He might have value to the 49ers in his salary being moved, and you could use that salary this year. There's not a lot of free agents left. You could roll that salary over into 2022. He has value in the trades he would get back, especially after, spending 3 extra picks to move up in the draft. Getting extra draft capital and trade for Jimmy Garoppolo is a big deal too, especially if it's a day 2 pick or something that could help you move around, or even a conditional pick for 2022 when you're down a first rounder. So I could see any of those scenarios playing out, and I think it's the only thing the 49ers could say right now is that he's our guy in case he's around, and saying he's our guy in case you're trying to keep his value up if other teams continue to call.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense too. And I have to ask, you look at these 2 quarterbacks that could potentially be on the board. We assume Trevor Lawrence is off the board at 1. You've got Zach Wilson. You've got Justin Fields, and hell, let's throw Trey Lance in there too. Out of these 3 quarterbacks, I don't need you to tell me which one you prefer, which one you think that the 49ers would pick, but what's the value that these 3 quarterbacks could potentially bring to San Francisco?
The Mac Jones, distant.
Oh, Mac Jones too. Yeah.
No, Mac Jones. His name, as soon as the trade happened, I saw Mac Jones and Trey Lance everywhere. And I was thinking, well, why those 2 names? Because that's interesting, because I would have thought that there'd be 2 and 3 on the list, and I still do. Mac Jones brings, some very Kirk Cousins-y, Matt Ryan-y, former Shanahan quarterback, traits, I think. And so I think it's easy for people to put that together. You don't trade up to number 3 for Mac Jones. You don't give up 4 total picks that you're spending on this selection, including the one that you're actually using on the player, for a Mac Jones. And he's a nice prospect, but I was even a little uncomfortable with him at 12, to be honest with you. So to me, it has to be either Trey Lance or Justin Fields. And the big thing for 49ers fans, and really all fans in the NFL, is we get to see a quarterback with that type of athletic ability and arm, and just the total package that those guys bring physically in a Shanahan offense. That's what's fun, and that's what I'm excited that we'll get a chance to see at some point, whether that's week 1 in 2021 or we have to wait until 2022 to actually see that on the field. I don't think that's gonna, I mean, here's the other thing about the Garoppolo part is you move up to 3, you're going to sit a quarterback all year long. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Even if you plan like Tua last year, the plan was, you have Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he's, with the hip, he might not even play all year. Of course he's going to play. And of course, whoever the 49ers draft is going to play. So that's why I think the 49ers will trade Garoppolo if they get the right offer. It just has to be more valuable than what the mentorship would be for Garoppolo to the new quarterback, but they're obviously moving on there. But having the quarterback with that much ability in Kyle Shanahan's offense is the exciting part of this entire trade. And the 49ers sort of, there's been a lot of talk of them reopening their window of a Super Bowl run with a rookie contract quarterback instead of an expensive $26 million quarterback for the next 5 years, and being able to fit Trent Williams and George Kittle, and they're going to have to do a deal really soon with Fred Warner, and Nick Bosa is going to be up at some point over the next few years as well. So you've got to fit those huge contracts, and you have a rookie contract to be able to work that out, and it just lengthens a window if you do get that superstar quarterback. And this deal works for the 49ers if they hit and they get that superstar quarterback and he develops under Kyle Shanahan. And if they miss, then it'll be a new GM and a new coach probably once the 49ers do have a first-round pick again in 2024.
Wow.
Oh, man. I think John Lynch has a key to the city, though, so I think he's bought himself some good favor. But he was willing to deal on Friday. When I look at Kyle Shanahan's offensive system, you lose Kendrick Bourne, but you still have Brandon Ayuk. You have Deebo Samuel, who the hope is that those 2 guys can stay healthy. Now you add Mohamed Sanu. What type of receiving threats? Outside of those guys, what about a running back? So for this team coming in, you talk about the offensive line, you talk about the skill players and running back. Is this a good enough system for a rookie quarterback to step in here in 2021 and maybe be the starter on day 1?
Yes. And they still have some things to do at wide receiver. Mohamed Sanu, I think they signed just to make sure they have some veterans in there, because it's really 1A, 1B at wide receiver and a lot of questions. And they're going to throw a draft pick or 2, I think, at that position as well. And just have a battle royal at wide receiver 3 through 5, really, and see who, because Sanu didn't even play much last year after they had traded for him. So, or after they signed him after he was released. But wide receiver still a need, and obviously Kittle's really the one there, but he's had some injury problems, so they're not done as far as their playmakers go, and they have to have a lot better injury luck than they had last year, because Debo, Ayuk, Kittle all had some injury issues. Not only Jimmy Garoppolo in that offense as well. So they've got to be healthy, and they've got to get what they expected in year 2 from Debo in year 3, and what they would expect naturally from a second-year quarterback that they drafted in the first round that they traded up for then in Brandon Ayuk, to be the guys that they expect them to be in their development in years 2 and year 3. And then you really got something. You have some dynamic playmakers, some guys that are really good catch and run players. And I mean, if you're adding Trey Lance or Justin Fields, maybe that next addition at wide receivers, that more linear outside deep threat type of a wide receiver that it could go really well with a quarterback that can really chuck it down the field.
Absolutely. Brian, we very much appreciate you taking the time to come through. We've got you every Monday through Friday over at Locked On 49ers, and folks can also catch you over at the Peacock and Williamson show, along with former NFL scout Matt Williamson. You can follow Brian on Twitter at BD Peacock. We appreciate you, buddy, for coming through, and best of luck.
Oh, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And by the way, it's Justin Fields.
Oh, yeah, that's what I want to hear. That's what I like hearing.
Bam, spoiler alert. But no, San Francisco is an intriguing team, and we talked about the NFC West. I think no question about it. The last 2 seasons, it's probably been the toughest division in football when you have, Aaron Donald. You have your quarterback scrambling for their life, regardless of, who it may be, who they're going against. Aaron Donald is the guy that continues to dominate. Then we saw San Francisco, 2 years ago, go on that very fun run to the Super Bowl. And, unfortunately, Jimmy G couldn't hit Emmanuel Sanders for a potential game-winning touchdown that would have sealed it for him. And then they couldn't stop Damian Williams on a last-effort touchdown in the final 2 minutes. So it was just kind of like a disappointing drop for the 49ers last season, and they were one of those teams that was drastically impacted by injuries. I mean, I feel like that was the theme for many teams last year. What could have been, right? And I feel like strength-wise, maybe if there weren't injuries to San Francisco, maybe they could have made another run at it, but then again, we'll never know. So the hope is they don't have time to sit around and sit on their hands and wait and see. They got to go out and find a way. How can we get back there in the shortest time possible? And I think John Lynch has done a phenomenal job as the GM. It's a tough thing to kind of do, for anybody coming in. He came in from being a broadcaster, but he learned from John Elway. He picked John Elway's brain, and then all of a sudden he started making power moves. And remember that one year in the draft where they completely fleeced the Chicago Bears? They had the Chicago Bears thinking that they were going to take this guy, and Chicago's like, we'll give you this, 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 and this to get it. And then they ended up taking somebody completely different. It was one of the best things I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, we've seen some great moves for San Francisco here recently, and they've done a very good job in the draft as well, where they've selected. Certainly, every team has its, stories that don't work out and everything. It happens with every franchise, but San Francisco here, making sure that they get their guy. And, I'm really glad that Brian, on the way out, mentioned that, like, look, it's Justin Fields, because Justin Fields is QB2 for me. I know a lot of people are in love with Zach Wilson, but Justin Fields is still quarterback 2 for me. So for me to think about this idea, which is exciting, Justin Fields and this Kyle Shanahan system and the San Francisco 49ers offense with these skill position players that are around him, it's a really exciting arsenal to have for a rookie quarterback and then potentially your future franchise quarterback as you move forward.
Well, I mean, for a guy that took his team to the national championship, he's kind of been in the last couple months under the subject of being quarterback 3 or quarterback 4 in some of these draft analysts' eyes, which, is weird. And then the one thing I'm seeing on Justin Fields is, well, he locks on only his one target. I feel like that's just a product of the Ohio State offense, to be honest with you. Ohio State's offense is not normally where you see the quarterback processing the field from left to right. It's, bam, I'm dropping back. If the left guy's my target, I'm looking there and I'm trying to find that matchup because they have speed at the wide receiver position. So it's different in the NFL, and I think Kyle Shanahan will obviously accelerate. I think where maybe a guy like Justin Fields will need to be working with him, he's going to do that. He's cerebral enough to be able to make that carryover. So, but like I said, I think a lot of people, and we could talk about this too, the Zach Wilson's pro day was on Friday. The talk right now on social media, him rolling out, throwing that bomb. But guess what? You know how often you're going to be able to make that throw in the NFL? It'll be rare, right? And if you do, yes, you're going to make SportsCenter. But here's the deal. Let's stop blowing up over a throw against air, no pressure in your face. But here's the thing that I look at. Zach Wilson's a talented quarterback. Don't get me wrong. Justin Fields, talented quarterback. I think you could flip a coin and choose between either of these two guys. I think they'd be great additions. But I do see Justin Fields probably being, I said it on Friday. I said Trey Lance to the 49ers, right? And they still could be that. I can see
okay.
the argument for Trey Lance or Justin Fields. I think both of them would be a great fit in Kyle Shanahan's offense.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, you look at them specifically as a fit in this offense, and both of them make a ton of sense. And I think that's something that we tend to lose when we contextualize whether or not somebody is quarterback 1, quarterback 2, quarterback 3, is who's selecting in those positions.
Yeah.
Who needs the quarterback, and who are those teams? What are their schemes, and who are those coaches? Because that changes everything, right? He might be quarterback 2 in some people's book, but is he a better fit with San Francisco, or rather is he, we're talking about Justin Fields. If he's quarterback 2 in my book, is he a better fit for the second team that's selecting a quarterback than he is a fit for the third team selecting a quarterback? Not at all. I think he's a much better fit with San Francisco than he would be with the New York Jets. And one thing I just want to mention in terms of the progression thing, which is a common knock on young quarterbacks, as you mentioned, it's easy to say that without the numbers in front of you, but the people who have taken the time to also put the numbers in front of you show tons of evidence of Justin Fields moving through his progressions when it's necessary, because that's the other part of it too, is that he had Chris Olave, he's got all these great receivers that were around him who, if your first read wins, and it's just that simple.
Absolutely. And well, look too, I think his ball placement is phenomenal. I mean, how many times do we see him? I mean, even at the start of the season, how many times did we see him start off with like a perfect game? Like he was 8 for 8, had over 200 yards passing. Like he was putting up Kurt Warner numbers, Ross. Right. And nobody seems to be talking about that. And then just like the crazy big arm throws, he doesn't underthrow guys. He throws it in the basket. That's what you want on those deep throws. He's got that to be successful at the next level. Could you imagine the division? Well, I don't know even what to make now. You have Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray. Then you have Matthew Stafford of all people in that division. And then if you add in a legitimate guy here like Justin Fields, that division is going to be fun to watch. I mean, I imagine we're going to see a lot of primetime afternoon, Sunday night football, Thursday night football, Monday night football games with the NFC West. So I think regardless, it's going to be fun. But Ross, we're just about legitimately, right? Tomorrow is going to be 1 month away from the NFL draft being live in Cleveland. And fans, we're going to have a live show. I mean, we're going to have a live show here for you, live interaction, bringing in the local experts when, the pick is made. It's going to be fun. I'm excited, Ross. Yeah,
we're going to have a ton of stuff going on over here. I also want to let everybody know that we have our Locked On NFL mock draft as well. We're in the midst of making our selections right now. Cody actually just made his selection. He's not going to tell you who he picked, but he actually just made his selection. And I love his selection. So, it's going to be a ton of fun. We have a lot of stuff coming up for you here all throughout the Locked On Podcast Network, going in through the NFL draft, and then as well as still rolling right around to the season as well. As Cody mentioned earlier, there's no off season here, so we're staying busy.
No, we bring it to you every Sunday, folks. All football talk, no fluff. This is the one place you can actually get legitimate football talk where we break down the X's and O's. We break down the biggest storylines. We analyze every angle possible to give you, the diehard football fans, a show that I think you all deserve, rather than celebrity cameo appearances and concerts and singing stuff. We don't do that stuff here, but very excited, obviously, to bring it to you here once again on this Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. I can promise you can pay me as much money as you want, and you're not going to get me busting out in the song. But I'll talk some X's and O's with you, no problem at all. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On NFL Sunday. As always, make sure you follow at Locked On NFL Pods to keep up with everything going on around the NFL and within our NFL channel here as well with the Locked On Podcast Network. Follow Cody on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL. Check him out every Monday through Friday over at Locked On Broncos. Myself on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola with Locked On Saints. And as always, we appreciate you for tuning in. Cody, take us home, man.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow is Monday, so you know what that means. Your favorite podcast, your favorite team. It is Mock Draft Monday with the biggest trades that just happened this Friday. How does it impact a team that you are choosing for? Listen to the local experts on the biggest stories, the Locked On Podcast Network. Ross and I, we will see you next Sunday for a brand new episode of Locked On NFL.